Well, as we are working through the holiday week, we have plenty to talk about on the weather front, getting some rain, maybe even some snow potential in parts of the plains here in the US this week. And then, of course, talking South America and the latest in Brazil and Argentina. Joining us now to take a look at the weather, Eric Stongrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist with Nutrient Ag Solutions. Eric, hope you had a great weekend and getting ready for Turkey Day coming up here this week, Thanksgiving. But we have plenty to talk about on the weather front here. And looking at the U.S. forecast, I know starting off the week, getting some rain in some of the driest areas of the country, but there's a lot to look at in the U.S. forecast here this week, Eric.
Yeah, and there's a lot to evaluate with the US forecast. And what I mean by that is if you went back to the end of October, we would have thought, based upon what I thought was decent evidence, that the midsection of the country was going to see decent rains in the month of November. And it just didn't. The pattern just fell apart. We saw instead near record dryness. In fact, for the 1st of November to today, there are parts of Missouri and Illinois that are having their driest start to any November on record. So last time this area saw precip where I live was back on, decent precip was on Halloween. So to see a system coming through that's going to increase the chances of rain right here, kind of in the Midwest, is huge. We need the moisture desperately. It needs to get into the river systems. It needs to revive soil moisture because we are extremely low in this part of the country. So yeah, it's active. Now the other side of this is to the south. We've kind of flipped the winds around. We've got some instability building into the lower Mississippi basin. And tonight we're going to watch for severe storms, maybe some of those being tornadic in the lower Mississippi River Valley. And that moves into the southeast tomorrow. But hey, maybe Iowa tonight, tomorrow, we might see a little bit of the white stuff floating around. I mean, so
Mhm.
don't forget it is late November and we can get that kind of thing going on. But I'm just happy to see moisture returning to one of the driest spots in the whole country. So yeah, good. Let's bring the system on. And by the way, this is the one that last week lived off the coast of California for the entire week. And then over the weekend, I don't know if you saw this in the news, but produced this highly photogenic and often videoed tornado that was in central Arizona. Very rare to see
Mm.
something like that in central Arizona this time of year. So system's got a bit of a kick to it. Let's hope it can bring in some good moisture.
You mentioned the S word. Should folks be concerned about any Thanksgiving travel plans? If grandma's coming over to the farmhouse, do we have to worry about any major snow events or anything like that this week?
Yeah, if your farmhouse is in Vermont, New Hampshire, or Maine, yeah, that's where I want you to be on the lookout. There's
Okay.
some cold air. Yeah, there's some cold air that's coming in with this system, but nowhere near as cold as we had looked at a week ago. So it backed off a bit. And this next system that follows it, it's going to be putting down some snow on Thanksgiving and parts of Montana as well. But then it'll be the weekend. So the end of this week into this weekend that delivers some snow to Wyoming, Colorado, and then out into the plains of Nebraska, maybe western Kansas, definitely Colorado, and then getting
Mhm.
into South Dakota. So they've got snow this weekend if you're traveling home. But on Thanksgiving, I'm primarily going to be watching deep, deep into New England for the heaviest snows.
Okay. All right. Well, and I know too, with some of this moisture coming to some of the driest parts of the U.S., it's going to help out the Mississippi River, I presume, as we move forward. I know, yeah, you mentioned to me before we jumped on here, getting back to what 9 feet below low stage, I believe, something like that, Eric.
Yeah, we saw it bounce after the big late October system. It got all the way up to 4 feet below low stage, and then nothing came in to support it after that. The pattern fell apart. And that was very poorly predicted by me and lots of us. We all missed it, if you ask me. So yeah, it's dropped back off to 9 feet, and the rain that's coming in now isn't the kind of rain that's going to just revive the river. It's going to first
Hmm.
be soaked up by the desperate needs of the soil, and then it'll eventually try to get itself into the. We need about. I mean, I hate to say the number, but we need 10 of these. We need 10 systems
Hmm.
like the one we're getting right now to bring that river up to a decent level by the time we get into mid-November, or excuse me, mid-January from mid-November. And that's also going to make for pretty unpleasant conditions should I get that forecast right. But
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. All right, well, let's turn our attention to South America, get an update on what's going on. Brazil, Argentina. It looks like for folks in central Brazil this week, some of that heavy rain from the south may be shifting northward. What's the latest you're seeing, Eric?
Well, I do know someone that's going to be happy, and I know that I'm sure you celebrate her entire catalog, but you heard Taylor Swift had to cancel a concert right down in Rio
Mhm.
due to the heat. That's incredible just to see how hot it did get. But there's a front that's moving north, and that's going to be bringing precipitation into some of the driest parts of Brazil. You look back over the last month, there's a big section of Mato Grosso do Sul that are near record dry, and then you come into southern Brazil, it's record wet. I'm talking about like Paraná, Santa Catarina, Rio Grande do Sul. So this front's going to clear through all of it. Something interesting to point out is there's been some decent rains coming into parts of Argentina. It's not enough to completely undo the long-standing drought, but it's brought some decent rain. And the Paraná River, which kind of comes out of Paraná, goes past the borders of Paraguay, Uruguay, into Argentina. It's flooding right now. So we haven't seen that river flood in a long time, but that's just due to how heavy the rain is. So how long does it last for central Brazil? Most of this week. They got better chances of rainfall. But did we really undo the long-standing issues? Maybe not quite yet. So we'll see if this area slips back into drought once we get past the next 7 to 10 days, and if that's going to continue to influence the bean crop in a negative way. I have heard, Jesse, a lot of people that are had the beans burn up and they're changing their
Mhm.
planting decision over to cotton, but I don't have strong evidence of that. That's just from talk and chatter I've heard at various spots through the internet. So something
Well,
to think about.
and I'm glad you mentioned that. I've also heard a little of the same, but again, I don't have, massive, overwhelming evidence of that either, but, it just goes to show that, you get, enough days in a row of 100-degree temperatures, and that could do some damage to certain crops, and, it's something we're gonna have to keep an eye on, and 2, if we do get to cotton, what's that gonna do as far as any double cropping, safrita corn, etcetera? That changes things up dramatically when it comes to that, so, a lot to look at there in South America if some of those rotations get switched up, Eric.
Yeah, and I don't think you do double crop on cotton. I
I
think
don't believe no, you
it's the
don't. I
only
don't
crop you
believe.
put in there. So
Yeah.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see what. And I don't, to be honest with you, Jesse, I haven't looked at cotton prices. I would have thought that even if you burned up your beans, it would have been smarter to go in and replant those, given what
Mhm.
corn and cotton prices are. But I don't know. I mean, that's up to
Yeah.
the decision of those growers, and they know best. So.
We'll have to ask some agronomists and some growers on that one for sure. Let's, talk though, a new outlook from CPC, here for December. What is that showing us here as we get into, next month?
So we expect this El Nino to reach a peak at some point in late December, early January. So in the next, let's call it 45 to 60 days, we're going to see what this El Nino can give us. And the new forecast from the CPC wants to flip the pattern away from what it is right now. So they want to drop some cooler air west again. They want to excite the central part of the United States with better storm systems rolling through. It's an outlook that I love. I mean, it's exactly what I want to see to break some of these long-standing drought conditions. But I've been burned by this El Nino more than once, and so I think a lot of us are right now saying, "All right, I see the signal. I see what you're talking about. Prove it." You know what I mean? Let's really get the pattern to flip around. It's only calling for drier conditions in the northern plains. That's where they've got drier outlook overall, and it's just barely drier. They've got a pretty active December coming up for a lot of us in the U.S.
Okay, some things to keep an eye on. Australia. I know that's another area of the world we've been watching closely, some impacts on their wheat crop and more. What's going on down there right now, Eric?
Yeah, so if you told me El Nino and Australia in the same sentence, I would say dry. Like that's the outcome. It's usually very dry in Australia. If you looked right now, though, the whole eastern half of the continent, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, even down to Tasmania, all forecast to be very, very wet. And that just tells you that something else is moving over the top of this El Nino. Currently, it's the MJO, but it's moving and therefore disrupting what we would typically call a normal El Nino progression into winter. So, long story short, I don't think that anything's settled. I don't think you can make a call on winter yet. Even though we all want to do that, I don't think you can. And so, what I would be advising folks that are listening right now, that we've got an overall mild forecast for winter for North America from all the major forecasting centers, and same thing for Europe. I would tell you that it is more likely that we're going to see some pretty massive disruptions to that through winter than it would be just to say it's going to be mild the entire time. So don't get settled. I think we're in for a bit of a wild ride for the next 90 plus days. And we're probably what, only 120 days away from planting our next crop here in the United States. So there's no rest for the weary, right?
There is no rest for the weary. Folks can stay up to date with the latest weather information online, ag-wx.com. And there you can sign up for Eric Snodgrass's weekly weather newsletter as well. Eric Snodgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions. Thanks for joining us. Have a happy Thanksgiving, Eric. We'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, you do the same.